Top 1. The Hope Diamond. The Hope Diamond. In 1911, Evelyn Walsh McLean, the flamboyant heiress of a Washington, D.C. newspaper empire, wore the 45.52-carat blue Hope Diamond to a lavish party just weeks after acquiring it. She arrived glittering in diamonds, unaware that within a decade, her son would be struck by a car, her daughter would take her own life, and her husband would lose his sanity. The stone, cut from a legendary jewel stolen from a Hindu temple, had begun its final journey, and it was only getting darker. The Hope Diamond's origins trace back to the Kolar mine in India, where the original 112-carat rough gem was said to be plucked from a sacred idol. French gem merchant Jean-Baptiste Tavernier brought it to Europe in the 17th century, and the curse reportedly began soon after. Tavernier's mysterious death, rumored to involve being torn apart by wolves, fed early whispers of doom. The diamond eventually reached Louis XIV, who commissioned it to be cut into the French blue. Both Louis XIV and Louis XVI would meet ignominious ends, as would Marie Antoinette, another bearer of the cursed jewel. Following the French Revolution, the diamond vanished, only to resurface in London in the 1800s. By this time, the stone had been reshaped into its current form and acquired a new name, the Hope Diamond, after its owner, Henry Philip Hope. But the rebranding could not outpace the curse. Subsequent owners suffered suicides, institutionalizations, bankruptcies, and violent deaths. A Turkish sultan reportedly gifted the gem to a concubine who was later murdered. A banker who acquired it lost everything in a matter of months. The Smithsonian Institution received the diamond in 1958, courtesy of jeweler Harry Winston, who mailed it in a plain brown package. Despite the benign setting of a national museum, rumors of the curse persisted. Staff members have jokingly blamed the diamond for minor misfortunes, while others remain uneasy about its legacy. Even Winston himself, who claimed not to believe in curses, reportedly refused to personally carry the gem to the museum. Officially, the Smithsonian disavows any belief in the curse. The diamond is presented as a geological marvel and a cultural artifact, yet its past reads less like a mineralogical report and more like a list of calamities. Photographs of past owners, many of whom met tragic ends, are kept in museum archives but rarely shown together. If the curse is real, it has outlived empires, crossed oceans, and outlasted logic. It has passed from kings to commoners, leaving destruction in its wake, and now it sits under glass, visited by millions. What remains unanswered is not whether the diamond is dangerous, but why those who possess it are always so sure they are the exception. Top 2. The Dybbuk Box, the Dybbuk Box. In 2001, a small wooden wine cabinet surfaced at an estate sale in Portland, Oregon. It appeared ordinary, measuring roughly 10 inches tall, with a pair of brass handles and Hebrew inscriptions carved into its surface. The seller, a Holocaust survivor, warned that the box should never be opened. She claimed it contained a dybbuk, a restless spirit from Jewish folklore said to inhabit objects and torment the living. The warning was ignored. Within weeks, the first owner would begin experiencing symptoms no doctor could explain. The buyer, a writer named Kevin Manis, purchased the box along with other household items. After bringing it home, he reported that the cabinet emitted a persistent odor of cat urine despite being cleaned repeatedly. Electrical devices in his house began to malfunction. Lights flickered. Doors opened on their own. Most disturbingly, Manis began suffering from vivid nightmares in which an old woman attacked him, whispering in a language he did not understand. These dreams would later be described almost identically by multiple subsequent owners. Manis eventually opened the box. Inside were mundane items including a dried rosebud, a lock of hair, a granite statue, and a gold wine goblet. Nothing appeared dangerous. Yet shortly after opening it, Manis experienced a stroke-like episode that temporarily impaired his vision and speech. His mother, who had briefly handled the box, suffered a severe medical episode the same day. Manis decided to sell the box online, attaching a detailed warning about its effects. The Dybbuk box passed through several owners via eBay. One buyer reported sudden hair loss and anxiety attacks. Another claimed his home filled with swarms of flies that vanished when the box was removed. A third owner, a medical student, described being plagued by the same recurring nightmare of an elderly woman pressing down on his chest while he slept. Each owner attempted to rid themselves of the box, only to encounter difficulty disposing of it. One claimed it reappeared on his doorstep after being thrown away. The story gained wider attention when paranormal investigators became involved. The box was featured in multiple documentaries and eventually acquired by a collector of haunted objects. During transport, witnesses claimed the storage container cracked without explanation. Several individuals involved in handling the box later reported depression, insomnia, and unexplained physical pain. In one case, a man who attempted to study the box experienced violent tremors and was hospitalized within days. Law enforcement involvement has been a point of contention. While there is no public record of a formal FBI investigation into the box itself, reports of unexplained disturbances and medical events were allegedly included in broader files related to anomalous civilian phenomena. These claims remain partially redacted, adding to the ambiguity surrounding the object. Skeptics argue that the Dybbuk box is a modern fabrication, a case of mass suggestion amplified by the internet. They point to the lack of physical evidence and the psychological power of belief. Yet the consistency of reported experiences across owners who had no contact with one another remains difficult to dismiss. The nightmares, the odors, the sudden illnesses, all followed the box as it moved across states and continents. Eventually, the box was sealed inside a container lined with religious texts and placed in storage. No public institution has agreed to display it. Even those who doubt its supernatural origin often refuse to handle it directly. The Dybbuk box no longer circulates, but its reputation does. If the box is nothing more than wood and metal, then it should pose no threat. Yet its history suggests that something intangible travels with it, affecting those who come too close. Whether that force is cultural belief, psychological contagion, or something far older, the pattern remains unchanged. Top 3. The Delhi Purple Sapphire. The Delhi Purple Sapphire. In 1857, during the violent upheaval of the Indian Rebellion, a British cavalry officer named Colonel W. Ferris removed a violet gemstone from a temple associated with the Hindu god Indra. The stone was taken as a war trophy and transported to England. From that moment forward, every record connected to the gem begins to shift in tone, moving away from ownership and toward warning. What Ferris carried home was later known as the Delhi Purple Sapphire. Although mineralogists would eventually identify it as an amethyst rather than a true sapphire, that distinction did nothing to alter what followed. The stone was set in a silver mount engraved with astronomical symbols and an unidentified script resembling ancient astrological notation. 2 scarab beetles were carved into the setting, an unusual feature not typical of Indian jewelry from the period. According to later descriptions preserved by the Natural History Museum in London, the gemstone itself showed no abnormal chemical or physical properties. It did not emit radiation. It was not toxic. And yet, its history reads like a ledger of collapse. Shortly after returning to England, Colonel Ferris suffered financial ruin and a rapid decline in health. Upon his death, the gemstone passed to his eldest son, who treated it as a hereditary treasure. Within a brief period, the son lost his business, fell into chronic illness, and spent the remainder of his life in poverty. By 1890, the stone changed hands again, this time through a chance encounter with Edward Heron Allen, a respected British scientist, linguist, and collector known for his rationalism and skepticism. Heron Allen initially dismissed the stone's reputation. However, soon after accepting it, a series of events began to disturb him. Members of his household experienced unexplained anxiety and sleep disturbances. He attempted to give the gem away twice. One recipient returned it after suffering repeated accidents and financial trouble. The second, a professional singer of some prominence, abruptly lost her voice and was forced to abandon her career. Both refused to keep the stone. In an attempt to rid himself of it permanently, Heron Allen threw the gemstone into London's Regent's Canal. 3 months later, a dredger recovered it during routine maintenance. The stone was sold by a canal worker and eventually traced back to Heron Allen himself. At this point, his tone changed completely. In letters and notes, he began referring to the stone as cursed and dangerous. By 1904, Heron Allen became convinced that the gem was affecting his infant daughter. The child suffered irregular breathing, constant crying, and disturbed sleep. Fearing for her life, he sealed the stone in a protective container and placed it in a bank vault. He instructed his family that it was not to be opened or removed until 33 years after his death. Alongside it, he left a written warning stating that the stone was stained with blood and that anyone who handled it should throw it into the sea. Heron Allen died in 1943. In accordance with his instructions, 33 years later, his daughter donated the sealed container to the Natural History Museum in London, where her father had once worked. The stone was accompanied by his warning letter. The museum cataloged the gem and acknowledged its unusual history. It was displayed with a label quoting Heron Allen's cautionary words, a rare admission of legend attached to a scientific collection. The story did not end there. In the early 2000s, a former library director named John Whitaker presented the stone's history at a symposium dedicated to Heron Allen. Following each conference session connected to the gem, Whitaker experienced a series of medical emergencies and near disasters, including violent storms, emergency surgeries, and repeated hospitalizations. The pattern disturbed even those who dismissed the curse as psychological. Today, the Delhi purple sapphire remains under museum care. Scientifically, it is ordinary. Historically, it is anything but. Its legacy is not defined by what it is made of, but by what seems to happen when it is remembered. Top 4. The Crying Boy Painting. The Crying Boy Painting. In 1985, a series of house fires swept through northern England, each leaving behind the same improbable survivor, a mass-produced painting of a tearful young boy. Firefighters began to whisper about it. The canvas always hung intact on scorched walls, untouched while everything around it turned to ash. Dozens of homes, different towns, different families. One painting, unburnt, watching. The painting, known as the Crying Boy, was originally produced in the 1950s by Italian artist Bruno Amadeo, under the pseudonym Giovanni Bragolin. It portrayed a sorrowful child with glistening eyes staring directly at the viewer. Although intended as kitsch decor, the portrait became strangely popular across working-class British households in the 1970s and 1980s. Retailers sold thousands of copies, but no one foresaw what would come next. Local fire departments began to notice a disturbing pattern. Homes destroyed by fire had one peculiar item in common. The Crying Boy painting often survived completely unscathed. It wasn't just the survival that disturbed them, but its perfect preservation. No burns, no soot, no melted frame. In multiple incidents, the painting was found face down amid the rubble, still whole. The British tabloid The Sun broke the story in September 1985 under the headline, "Blazing Curse of the Crying Boy," reporting on more than 50 house fires across the country allegedly linked to the artwork. Firefighters began referring to it as the cursed painting, and some refused to enter houses where it was hanging. One officer, quoted anonymously, claimed, "I've seen this painting survive 5 fires. 5. Nothing else made it out." His statement was never officially confirmed, but it was enough to fuel hysteria. The Royal Berkshire Fire Brigade investigated the phenomenon. While they found no definitive supernatural explanation, they did suggest that the prints were made on fire-retardant materials, possibly coated in a varnish that made them more resilient. Still, that did not explain why only this painting seemed to consistently avoid destruction while hanging among highly flammable furnishings. Reports became more personal. Homeowners who bought the painting described sudden streaks of bad luck, lost jobs, illnesses, deaths in the family. One woman claimed the painting fell from the wall the same night her husband died of a stroke. Another returned the painting to the store after her cat died without warning. Over time, local charities refused to accept donated copies, and secondhand stores began throwing them away. Public fear reached such a peak that the Sun organized a mass burning. They invited readers to bring their Crying Boy paintings to a public bonfire to end the curse. Hundreds were destroyed, yet the myth lived on, and to this day, copies continue to surface in abandoned homes, attics, or thrift stores, still in pristine condition. Art historians dismiss the entire episode as mass hysteria fueled by tabloid sensationalism, but the consistency of reports, the quantity of fires, and the recurring survival of a specific image remain difficult to explain. No other artwork of the era has such a track record, and no other painting has been blamed for such a trail of destruction. If the eyes of the boy were painted to evoke pity, they did more than that. They watched homes burn, lives fall apart, and people descend into fear. And through it all, the boy never blinked. Top 5. The Uluru Rock Fragment. The Uluru Rock Fragment. In the heart of Australia's Northern Territory stands Uluru, a massive sandstone monolith sacred to the Anangu people. Towering 141 feet above the desert floor, it is believed to house ancestral spirits and carry deep spiritual power. For centuries, the indigenous custodians warned that disturbing Uluru would bring misfortune. But few paid attention until the rocks began to return. Beginning in the 1980s and intensifying through the early 2000s, the National Park Administration at Uluru Karachuta began receiving unusual packages. Inside were small pieces of rock, sometimes wrapped in cloth, other times mailed with no protection at all. What made these deliveries remarkable were the letters that accompanied them. Dozens, then hundreds of tourists from around the world wrote confessions. They had taken a piece of Uluru home as a souvenir, and since then, their lives had fallen apart. The letters read like chapters of a collective nightmare. One couple described a series of car accidents and financial collapse within weeks of returning from Australia. Another man from Germany said he lost his job, his wife, and nearly his life in a skiing accident, all within 6 months of taking a pebble. A family from the United States claimed their home caught fire just days after they brought the rock back. Many pleaded for forgiveness and begged that the rocks be returned to their rightful place. Park rangers began cataloging the stones and storing them in a restricted section of the visitor center, unofficially referred to as the sorry pile. Each returned rock was labeled with its sender's name, date, and the origin of the package. Over the years, the pile grew. By 2010, it contained over 1,000 fragments, ranging from tiny chips to hand-sized chunks. The letters attached were often written in desperation, filled with guilt, regret, and stories of inexplicable hardship. While some considered the phenomenon to be superstition or coincidence, the consistency of the reported misfortunes drew attention. Even postal workers began to speak of the strange aura surrounding the returned packages. Some were damaged, others smelled of sulfur or decay, despite containing only dry stone. In one case, a letter arrived from Spain with a rock and an apology scrawled in 3 different inks, as if written over multiple attempts. The Anangu people never asked for the rocks to be returned. Their stance remained consistent. The land was not to be disturbed. For them, the issue was not about revenge or punishment, but about spiritual balance. Removing a part of Uluru, even a pebble, disrupted the Chukurpa, the sacred law that connects people, land, and ancestors. From their perspective, the bad luck was not a curse, but a consequence. Despite the growing number of returned rocks, the Australian government did not launch an official investigation. No scientific studies were conducted, yet the phenomenon became so widely known that tour operators began issuing warnings to visitors. Park signage was updated to discourage the collection of stones. In 2019, climbing Uluru was permanently banned out of respect for its cultural significance and the ongoing reports of spiritual disturbance. Today, the rocks continue to arrive. Some are returned by second-generation family members who inherited them, unaware of their origin until misfortune struck. Others arrive anonymously, shipped from countries as far away as Japan, Brazil, and Norway. The stones are no longer simply geological artifacts. They are symbols of a broken pact, carried across oceans, and then sent back by trembling hands. If a fragment of desert stone can carry memory, then Uluru has been trying to forget. But the land remembers, and it does not let go easily. Top 6. The Maori Warrior Mask. The Maori Warrior Mask. In the archives of the British Museum lies a ceremonial wooden mask, once worn by Maori warriors during pre-colonial times in New Zealand. Carved from native timber and adorned with dog hair and red ochre, the mask was originally part of a burial ritual intended to protect both the living and the dead. But when British explorers seized it in the 19th century and shipped it to London, something else may have come with it. Over a century later, museum staff began to notice a pattern. Those who handled the mask often became ill, and 2 curators assigned to catalog it died within the same calendar year. The mask, known simply as Artifact 1932-7, 15.7 in museum records, was considered culturally tapu, sacred and restricted, by Maori elders. According to tradition, it should never have been displayed, and certainly not touched without ritual preparation. Yet in 2007, during a routine reclassification of indigenous holdings, the mask was brought out of storage and studied for public exhibition. Within months, both lead conservators on the project had died, one of an unexpected stroke, the other in a cycling accident in broad daylight. The connection was dismissed at first, but the timing was difficult to ignore. Museum workers began sharing stories in hushed tones. Those who entered the storage room reported headaches, dizziness, and a sense of being watched. One technician described the smell of burning wood, though no fire had occurred. Another reported seeing red pigment on her gloves, despite never handling the mask directly. Complaints mounted until supervisors ordered the artifact returned to a sealed case, suspended from public view. Meanwhile, calls from Maori leaders in New Zealand grew louder. The mask, they said, was not a piece of art. It was an ancestral object imbued with mana, spiritual authority. Its presence in a foreign land without ceremony or consent violated fundamental tenets of Maori law. In 2010, representatives from several EWI tribes issued a formal request for repatriation, citing not only cultural reasons, but also reports of spiritual unrest. The British Museum acknowledged the request but declined to release the artifact, citing ownership protocols and international law. Faced with internal unrest and public scrutiny, museum officials chose a compromise. The mask was moved to a specially constructed wooden enclosure, lined with flax and placed inside a climate-controlled room inaccessible to most staff. It would not be displayed again. No official comment was made regarding the alleged deaths or illnesses, and the museum quietly removed references to the object from its visitor guide. Outside the institution, however, the story spread. Paranormal researchers cited the mask in lists of cursed colonial artifacts. Maori spiritual leaders warned that such objects carry not just physical presence, but ancestral consciousness. A respected Tohunga, spiritual elder, was quoted in the New Zealand Herald as saying, "When you steal a voice from the dead, it does not stay silent." The British Museum has refused all subsequent interview requests about the mask. Its exact location is now known to only a few, and it remains uncatalogued in the public database. Yet rumors persist that its case is occasionally found ajar, that guards have refused to enter the storage wing alone, that an intern quit after hearing chanting in an empty corridor. If curses are just metaphors for guilt, then this mask speaks volumes. And if they are something more, then perhaps the dead are not done speaking. Top 7. The Japanese Temple Mirror. The Japanese Temple Mirror. In 1998, a collector from Tokyo acquired a bronze mirror from a decaying Shinto temple slated for demolition in Kyoto. The mirror, nearly 12 inches across with a polished front and engraved back, bore the image of Amaterasu, the Shinto sun goddess, and was said to have once belonged to a shrine priest who vanished under mysterious circumstances. Within 1 year of its removal, 3 people closely connected to the mirror would be dead. The collector, a 53-year-old businessman with an interest in esoteric relics, reportedly ignored the temple caretaker's warning. The mirror, he was told, was never meant to reflect the living, only to return light to the gods. Nevertheless, the object was boxed and transported to Tokyo. Weeks later, the man collapsed in his apartment and died of an apparent brain aneurysm. No previous health issues were noted. The mirror had been placed on the wall above his desk, facing a window. Shortly after his death, the mirror passed to his younger sister, who arranged to have it appraised. During the assessment, she too began experiencing dizziness and blurred vision. Days later, she was found unconscious in her home and later died from what doctors described as a sudden cardiac event. The third death came months later. The antique dealer who had agreed to find a buyer for the mirror died in a vehicular collision while transporting the piece to an exhibition in Nagoya. Investigators noted that he had been driving below the speed limit and that weather conditions were clear. The mirror was returned to storage. Reports circulated among Tokyo's tight-knit community of antique experts. Some described it as a sun gate or an object infused with kami, the divine spirits of Shinto belief. Others claimed it was part of a kagami, a ritual triad of mirror, sword, and jewel. Three sacred objects meant never to be separated. Without the others, the mirror's balance was believed to be broken, its spiritual resonance corrupted. No museums in Japan have accepted the item. Its current whereabouts are rumored but unconfirmed, with some claiming it was reinterred in the mountains of Nara Prefecture under supervision from shrine elders. Spiritual purification rites were allegedly performed, though no documentation has surfaced. Parapsychologists who reviewed the case suggested a psychosomatic response triggered by the mirror's folklore. Yet medical records show no underlying conditions among the three deceased. More unsettling was the fact that each individual died within 33 days of coming into physical contact with the mirror, a detail noted in a now withdrawn journal entry by a Japanese academic studying cursed objects. Attempts to photograph the mirror have reportedly failed, with digital cameras showing distortions or glare, regardless of lighting. One collector who tried to scan the engraving described the resulting image file as corrupted, even when opened on multiple devices. Whether this is technological coincidence or something else remains unknown. In Japanese belief, mirrors are not merely tools of reflection. They are portals, symbols of truth, and sacred instruments of divine witness. To stare into a ritual mirror, especially one used in forgotten rites, is to risk being seen by something not meant to look back. If this mirror once captured sunlight for the gods, perhaps it now reflects only loss. And whatever it once revealed, it has taken great care to keep it hidden. Top 8. The Bassano Vase. The Bassano Vase. Sometime in the 15th century, in a quiet village near Naples, a silver vase was crafted as a wedding gift for a young bride from a noble Italian family. She never made it to the altar. According to local accounts, she was found dead in her bedroom on the eve of the ceremony, the vase still clutched in her hands. Her cause of death was never determined. The vase, beautiful but now tainted by tragedy, was passed to a relative. He too would die shortly after receiving it. Thus began the whispered legend of the Bassano vase, a relic that brought death to anyone who possessed it. The vase was made of solid silver, about 10 inches tall, ornately engraved with floral and serpent motifs. Despite its artistic value, the object remained shrouded in suspicion. Over the next few centuries, ownership of the vase was quietly transferred, often after sudden and unexplained deaths. Records from 17th and 18th century estate archives make oblique references to a silver vessel of sorrow, described as cursed and removed from inventory following each incident. By the 20th century, the Bassano vase resurfaced in a more public setting. In 1988, it was auctioned in Italy with a handwritten note attached, "Beware, this vase brings death." The warning was ignored. The buyer, a local pharmacist, died within 3 months of acquiring it. His family, undeterred, sold it to a surgeon, who also died shortly after. At least 2 more owners, an archaeologist and an antique dealer, succumbed to similar fates in quick succession. None of the deaths were violent or overtly suspicious, but all were sudden and none involved prior illness. Eventually, the vase became unsellable. Auction houses refused to list it. Museums declined to display it. The last known owner reportedly threw it out his window in frustration, narrowly missing a police officer below. When asked why, he is said to have screamed, "It brings nothing but death." He was arrested, but no charges were filed. The vase was temporarily held by local authorities until it disappeared from public record. According to local legend, the police handed the artifact over to the Catholic Church, where it was buried in an undisclosed location, encased in a lead-lined box and interred beneath a monastery. The church has never confirmed this. Some versions claim the vase was dropped into the Adriatic Sea, others that it remains hidden in a private vault. No photographs exist, and it is no longer listed in any official Italian heritage database. Skeptics argue that the deaths were coincidental, and the vase never held any curse beyond local superstition. Yet the consistency of the pattern, combined with the refusal of institutions to accept the artifact, keeps the story alive. The phrase Bassano vase has become synonymous in Italian folklore with silent, inevitable tragedy. If beauty can disguise menace, then the Bassano vase did so perfectly. It was crafted as a gift of joy and unity, but delivered only silence, sorrow, and death. Top 9. The Terracotta Cursed Figurine. The Terracotta Cursed Figurine. In 1996, a team of South Korean archaeologists conducting an unofficial survey near the edges of the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor in Xi'an, China, uncovered a terracotta figurine unlike any previously cataloged. Unlike the larger-than-life soldiers of the famed terracotta army, this statue stood only about 14 inches tall, with exaggerated facial features, angular limbs, and a contorted posture. It was buried several feet away from the main excavation zone, in an area considered off-limits. Within 1 year of its removal, 3 members of the team would be dead, and the figurine was quietly returned, without ceremony or documentation. The team, led by Professor Li Sang-Wu of Hanyang University, had been granted limited access to the periphery of the Imperial Tomb Complex. During a ground-penetrating radar scan, they located an anomalous cavity and unearthed the figurine. Unlike typical statues from the Qin dynasty, this object was made of a darker clay blend and exhibited signs of intense heat exposure. The inside of the hollow figure contained what appeared to be scorched silk and remnants of a powdery red substance later identified as cinnabar. Mercury sulfide, a compound associated with immortality rituals. Shortly after the discovery, strange incidents began to occur. One assistant suffered a seizure on site and later developed an aggressive neurological disorder. A second researcher died in a traffic accident under unusual circumstances. His car veered off a straight road with no skid marks. The most prominent casualty, Professor Li himself, died of a cerebral hemorrhage 3 months after the figurine was brought to Korea. Medical records confirmed he had no prior health conditions. Internal university memos reference superstitious concerns among staff and cultural sensitivity violations. Chinese authorities were not officially notified of the find. The artifact had been smuggled out with the intention of eventual private exhibition, but the mounting fatalities forced a reversal. According to a confidential letter leaked years later, the figurine was returned at night through an intermediary to a Buddhist monastery near Mount Hua. It has never been seen publicly again. Speculation about the figurine's purpose varies. Some believe it was a ritual decoy designed to absorb spiritual energy from grave robbers or trespassers. Others suggest it was used in pre-burial curse rites, placed intentionally outside the tomb to deter the curious. Its distorted features and sealed cavity gave rise to another theory, that it served as a binding vessel, imprisoning a spirit or Hun displaced from the emperor's realm. Attempts to photograph or scan the figurine prior to its return failed repeatedly. The only known image, a blurry Polaroid taken on the day of its unearthing, shows the statue's shadow more clearly than its surface. No 3D scans or academic papers were published. The university has removed all public records of the expedition, and members of the research group have refused interviews. Within Chinese funerary tradition, objects placed beyond the threshold of a tomb often held protective or retributive roles. In this case, the object may have been a silent sentinel, waiting centuries to be disturbed, and once awakened, it ensured it would never be disturbed again. If something ancient was sealed inside that figurine, it did not forgive being unearthed. It warned, then it vanished. Top 10. The African Fire Mask. The African Fire Mask. In 2003, an intricately carved wooden mask from West Africa surfaced at a private estate sale in London. Believed to originate from the Yoruba people of Nigeria, the mask bore symbols associated with ancestral invocation and spiritual protection. Roughly 16 inches tall, it featured charred, blackened wood, goat hair fringe, and traces of red ochre paint along its brows and lips. It had reportedly been in storage for decades, until someone hung it on a wall. What followed was a pattern so violent and specific it drew suspicion. 3 house fires in 3 countries, all tied to the same object. The mask was first purchased by an art dealer specializing in tribal artifacts. Within 2 weeks of installation in his gallery, a fire broke out overnight, destroying part of the second floor. Investigators could not determine the cause. Faulty wiring was suspected, but no electrical issues were found. Remarkably, the mask survived, scorched but intact, and was eventually sold to a private collector in Sydney, Australia. Less than a year later, the Sydney home caught fire while the owners were on vacation. Neighbors reported hearing a series of popping sounds before the blaze erupted. Firefighters found the living room completely destroyed. The mask again was recovered, this time with a large vertical crack running through its center. Insurance adjusters flagged the case for inconsistencies, but the origin of the fire was never identified. The collector, spooked, sold the mask anonymously through an online platform. Its third and final known location was in Toronto, where it was purchased by a young anthropology professor who specialized in African ritual objects. She displayed the mask in her study. 6 months later, in the middle of winter, a fire started in that very room. Investigators cited a malfunctioning space heater, but the professor's colleagues contested this. She reportedly did not use portable heating. The fire destroyed half her home, and the mask was again pulled from the ashes, this time singed along the base but structurally intact. Word of the incidents began to circulate in online collector communities. The mask was believed to be tied to Igungun rituals, ceremonies honoring the spirits of ancestors. In some traditions, masks used in such rites are considered living vessels, not to be displayed casually or outside their cultural context. Disturbing them, or moving them far from sacred land, was said to provoke a spiritual response. Whether that response was metaphorical or literal became a matter of grave concern. The mask was eventually acquired by a private British collector who had heard of the fires and intended to debunk the rumors. He stored it in a climate-controlled reinforced case in his basement vault and installed motion detectors and temperature sensors around it. The mask has not moved or ignited anything since, but the collector reportedly refuses to enter the vault alone. No institution has expressed interest in acquiring the object. Museums consulted were cautious, noting cultural and ethical concerns about displaying ritual artifacts without community consent. One West African scholar, shown photographs of the mask, refused to comment. He simply said, "That mask was never meant to cross oceans." To this day, the African fire mask exists in a kind of limbo, hidden, studied, but never fully understood. Whether the fires were mere coincidence or spiritual backlash, the pattern left behind is scorched into 3 separate lives in 3 separate homes, continents apart. If fire is a cleansing force, perhaps something ancient was trying to purify the places it had been exiled to. Or perhaps it was simply trying to return home by burning everything in its path. Conclusion: these 10 artifacts, scattered across continents and centuries, reveal a pattern too consistent to ignore. They are not just relics. They are echoes of unresolved forces, each one leaving behind a signature not in ink or inscription, but in suffering. From museums to private homes, from auction blocks to restricted vaults, these objects have traveled far, carrying more than just history. What they expose is not a random series of accidents, but a coherent structure of disruption. Each object appears benign on the surface, stone, wood, silver, paint, but triggers a cascade of misfortunes once touched, disturbed, or removed from its original context. And consistently, those who come into contact with them report similar patterns. Unexplained illness, loss, fire, neurological symptoms, vivid nightmares. These effects are documented not in folklore alone, but in police reports, insurance records, museum logs, and academic notes, many of which have since gone missing or were never officially acknowledged. The suppression is not accidental. Many of these objects have vanished from public databases, returned in silence, hidden by institutions too cautious to admit they were ever possessed. In some cases, museum staff refused to display or even handle them. Others were buried under legal bureaucracy, returned to sacred ground without press release or plaque. The result is a strange paradox. The most dangerous artifacts are often the least studied. Their danger, it seems, lies not in their material, but in what they threaten to reveal. The potential loss is incalculable. Each item, if properly understood, could open new avenues into anthropology, consciousness studies, material science, and the relationship between belief and reality. What properties allow a statue to rotate on its own in a sealed case? What kind of field, if any, links a rock fragment to misfortune continents away? Why do patterns of harm replicate across unrelated cases, separated by geography and culture? These are questions that remain deliberately unanswered, and the threat continues. Even as we digitize knowledge and scan ancient texts, the truly disturbing phenomena are still locked in boxes, drawers, and climate-controlled vaults. Not because we lack the tools to study them, but because someone, somewhere, has decided that what they contain is too dangerous to make known. Every curator who repositions a cursed item, every collector who seals an object in lead, is participating in a silent network of containment. The most chilling truth may not be that these artifacts are cursed, but that they function as instruments of memory, refusing to be forgotten. They resist translation, resist analysis, and punish those who treat them as decoration. They do not whisper, they wait. And so the question is no longer whether curses are real. It is, why do they always follow us home? If these accounts of cursed relics have changed the way you look at the history surrounding us, please subscribe and like our channel. We are unearthing the mysteries that they have tried to bury. Help us plant the seeds of the future. The next treasure trove will be open soon.